Well, welcome to all of our Northwest Club members. This is Ken Wright. This is Joylin Kent,
Hello.
my evil assistant. And Joylin is the head of our wine club and has been for many years. She's has many roles in our company actually. Came to us 8 years ago from Isle, Texas. But do you want to tell us a little bit about the Northwest Club?
Yeah, so the Northwest Club, originally it was our KWC/TE club, so Tyra 7. And it was the first club that we started with in 2009. And we still have club members. Hopefully you're watching right now. And thank you for being a part of us for these years.
All these years.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And
yeah, it's such an amazing thing to have that kind of support.
absolutely.
And going back, you know, we of course have been in existence. We started, as not all may know, I started Panther Creek in 1986. Created that myself. I was my only employee for 5 years. That was difficult, but I got through it. And but then in '94 we sold Panther Creek and recreated ourselves as Ken Wright Cellars here in Carlton. And so we've been around a long time. We've had a lot of folks that have been with us even since back in the '80s, who are still with us. Some of them members of our wine club now. So in fact, not only those 11 years of wine club, but going all the way back even to the '80s, which is amazing. We can't thank.
Absolutely.
Those people are the foundation of our business.
Yeah.
Can't thank you guys enough. So what are we tasting today?
So we're going to start with the 2017 Pinot Blanc. So this is a brand new release with a brand new label that David Burkthum did for us. So all of our white wines for the 2017 will have a new label. Awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. So this would be an example of the old label that we had for all of the white wines. In fact, back in the day, this was the label for the Pinot Noir as well, if some of you may recall. And of course, we moved on to David Burkthum's work in 2000 for the Pinot Noir, and now we're finally moving to David. Finally, have David helping us. 20 years later, here he is helping us. It's an awesome thing. Here he is 20 years later helping us come up with some beautiful artwork for our white wines and the rosé.
Yeah.
And our Willamette Valley Pinot, right?
Right. So Ken, why don't you tell us about why you chose to put mistletoe on the label?
So the Freedom Hill is the source of this Pinot Blanc. We've been, it's a great site. It's planted in the very early 80s by Dan and Helen Duchesne. Their son, Dustin, now is managing the site. So they've had succession, which is great. It's awesome for them and their family. Pinot Blanc is, I love the variety in that location. Not everyone may know that both Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc are mutations of Pinot Noir. And Pinot Blanc being the completely white version. So the grape itself is completely white grape. Pinot Gris, on the other hand, is almost kind of a root beer color, so it's in between white and in the darker fruit. But Pinot Blanc is the completely albino version of Pinot Noir, if you will. And it does, it is, however, I think, best grown in an area where it's cooler. Because I think unlike our Pinot Noir, we would like our Pinot Noir to have a lot of weight, a lot of breadth, a lot of power, and a lot of depth that comes with a little. You don't want a wine that's super screechingly high acid, which essentially makes the wine narrow and angular and unpleasant for red wine. But for our white wines, we want that crispness. We want something that cuts through sauces when we're having food, and that really is clean, a very clean presence on the palate. And so you want to be in a slightly cooler area, and Freedom Hill is that. Freedom Hill is close to the coast. It's our vineyard that's closest to the coast, being in the Coast Range itself. It lies on the east side of the Coast Range, down by Dallas, Oregon.
Not Dallas, Texas.
Not Dallas, Texas. And so being there, it's cooler simply by being closer to the ocean, but also the influence a bit of the Van Duzer corridor as well. And so I love the variety here. I think when it's grown again in that correct place, like that, where it's cooler and the acidity remains lifted, it's a beautiful wine. We don't make much. We only have an acre. That's it. This is all we do. And
so get it while you can.
It's really a labor of love. No, we don't do it. It doesn't make us any money. I mean, it just doesn't. But it's such a beautiful wine, and everybody in the company loves it.
I love our Pinot
I know
Blanc.
that my lovely wife loves it. You know, Karen loves it. People really, really do appreciate this wine, and so we're going to continue to make it as long as our company loves it. And there you go.
Yeah.
It is made old school, and so it is, all French oak, neutral French oak, fermented in barrel. The wine, once fermented, it remains in contact with that original yeast. Okay, we don't rack it. We don't move the wine away from the original yeast. It remains in contact, allowing those yeast cells to degrade, to fall apart.
Right.
They go through what's called autolysis, which is where the cell wall just breaks down, and all the things consumed during fermentation, like protein, are released back into the wine, and that's what creates tremendous texture. Like all of that glycerin you feel in wine, a lot of it comes from the breakdown of yeast cells and that glycerin that's delivered during that time, called nanoproteins. So the wine remains in contact with yeast until we bottle.
Right.
So 8 months, 9 months, and benefits from that influence. So
now we are on to the 2016 Celilo Vineyard. This is actually the last year that we took fruit from Celilo.
Okay. Not Oregon.
It is not in Oregon.
Not Oregon. And we began taking fruit from Celilo in 1992. We were looking for a source of Chardonnay. At that time, in the Oregon industry, most of the material, the clonal material that was planted in Oregon, was not suitable for our environment. It was University of California Davis 108, which required a lot of heat. It really needed a lot of heat to do well, I think. That's just my personal opinion.
Right.
The wines in general, I felt, were a bit chalky. They lacked depth. And were aggressively phenolic on the palate, and so they didn't have that, the kind of pleasurable textures that you want to have with great Chardonnay. So we went looking elsewhere, and I had a friend of mine, Rick Small, up in Woodward Canyon. He and his lovely wife Darcy at Woodward Canyon, a great winery, great original winery up in Walla Walla. And I'd met Rick actually in California first, back in the day, in the 80s. And I called him, wondering if there was a source in Washington that might be an amazing source for quality Chardonnay. And he had just started working with Celilo himself and just loved it and recommended it to me. And so 92 was our first vintage. And we made wine from there right up until this vintage, this latest year. We are now making wine from Chardonnay from new clone material here in Oregon. In fact, we were one of a number of people that brought in the 548 clone to Oregon back in, I think it was 01. And planted that. We were first of a group that we worked with to plant that. And we love what that's doing. And so we are now, we've had some planted since 01. We're now looking to, this last year we planted 4 acres at Bonnie Jean and an acre at Carter.
Right.
Again, this is barrel fermented, all French oak. Unfortunately, the oak, when you're using oak for aging and or for fermentation, with varieties that are all about texture, particularly Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, French oak is really the only thing to use in my mind.
Right.
Other oak sources tend to be too aggressive, too resinous, and they absolutely kill texture. Resin is a killer of texture. What we want are the sugars.
Right.
We want wood that has a lot a lot of sugars, inherent sugars, hemicelluloses, complex sugars. That's what you look for in your wood source for those varieties for me, because they're so complementary. Yeah. It's beautiful. Aging gorgeously. Awesome.
So on to Pinot Noir. So we're gonna switch out our glasses now. So we're gonna.
Thank you.
Yep. So you wanted to start with Latchkey first? Yep.
Please.
All right. So 2015 vintage. There we are.
Latchkey is, thank you. Latchkey is the Dundee Hills. So volcanic. And as Joylin may have mentioned in the past, she would let you know that this is the vineyard we share, that I share with my oldest son, Cody.
Share.
Yeah. We split that vineyard right down the middle. And it's pretty fun to be out there with Cody because he's really different. He has, his...
In a good way.
In a really good way. And he makes wine and he's his own person. He absolutely has his own approach. And it's hilarious to be out there with him. And I'll have one opinion about when we should be harvesting, and he'll have a completely different opinion. And it's all very well founded and reasoned. It's well thought out, But it just shows that there are different ways to skin a cat in this world and still come up with something really amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I'm always right. Whatever. Just kidding. I can say that.
But yeah, as his dad.
As his dad, I can say that.
Wow.
Very pretty. 15 was a year, again, as a very warm year, the warmest since 1992. It did also have quite a bit of crop, thankfully. Thankfully, so it extended season. We ended up with a year, it was a great teaching year for us, because in the past, it's really easy, because we were back in the day when we were doing, back in 1987, we began doing acreage contracts. And that was the first year of acreage contracts in the United States that I'm aware of. And by doing acreage contracts, we were able to pay people by the acre rather than by the ton, able to control crop level, which was huge. But it's huge, especially in a cool year where you're struggling for heat. When you're challenged for heat, you want to remove crop. You want to remove the work of the plant so that it happens faster. Okay, you want to accelerate ripening in a tough year like that, so that you do end up harvesting before fall rain, right? And so that's when those acreage contracts are crazy important. To be able to pay a grower well, where they're making good money and they're not affected by the crop level, but you fall on your own sword, you're going to lose crop, you're going to lose volume, but you will be able to make a compelling wine. That's the key. And so, but in a hot year, it's the opposite. That's a lesson that came later, I think, for us. That in a hot year, the last thing you want is a small crop. Because everything happens too fast. Everything happens too fast. You gain sugar too quickly. You're forced, as a winemaker, grower, you're forcing your hand to that way. You have to harvest early because things are going to get overripe quickly. And so in a hot year, you want a lot of crop. It's the only thing slowing the vine down, right? So, and 15 was a year that really exhibited that understanding, where we just said, we're not dropping anything. It was so hot, the hottest since 92, again, very, very warm. So we just said, leave it. We need to slow the plant down. And it really, really worked, because the wines still have managed to have a fresh profile. Otherwise they wouldn't have. This would have been all about dried fruit, right? It would have been prune-like and so forth. And it wouldn't have this freshness.
All right, so we are on to our last Pinot Noir. So this is, again, the Freedom Hill Vineyard, 2015 vintage. So we take Pinot Blanc and Pinot Noir from that vineyard.
Right. So Freedom Hill, to go back in history a little bit, again, we began taking fruit from Freedom Hill in '87. In the early days, the trellis was a very simple trellis system called the Sealy-Winquist system. And Sealy and Winquist were two realtors down in Salem. And in their effort to sell property, vineyard property, and having a lot of clients that had no money, a lot of young couples that had nothing, that couldn't put two nickels together, they came up with this trellis system that they recommended that was super simple. You know, a post every 16 feet, one wire, one fruit wire. That's it. One fruit wire right here, chest level, right? And so you would chain the vine, the trunk, up to that 4-foot level, and then you'd have often you'd have two permanent arms. So it was actually not cane fruit, it was what we call cordon, which is our permanent arms. And it was simple. It was like stupid simple. There was no, instead of a vertically shoot position system like we have so commonly now, where all year round you're threading shoots through this trellis to keep things going vertical. It's very labor intensive, right? Well, that old system, the shoots would grow. They would grow vertically for about a foot to a foot and a half. And then they'd gain enough weight that they would just flop. And so the fruit would just, the vine, the tissue, all the shoots would just flop to the vineyard floor. And instead of hedging, you would just mow them. You would just mow them. You're just mowing the things. And that's how you're controlling the growth instead of hedging. But what happened is when the foliage would flop, it would leave the fruit, which is at the beginning of each shoot. The first two positions is where your fruit is. It would leave that fruit fully exposed on that high wire. And it would be boom, it's in the sun, like full on, in the sun, all day long. And that exposure, the reaction by the berries to that exposure all day long was for the skins to thicken in the berries. I mean, really significantly thicken. If you and I, you've done this with me before, but not everybody out there has, but when you go to a vineyard that is east facing or vertically shoot positioned, the skins are really thin on the berries, right? But if you go to a vineyard that's west facing or like Carter, or the old school flop system where the fruit's super exposed, it's like chewing on leather. I mean, that's how thick the skins get. And in the end, what that means is a lot of tannin for us in the vineyard, right? I'll never forget, there was an article in the New Yorker that was written by a writer who was writing about Oregon Pinot Noir and about the different qualities, different styles of Oregon Pinot Noir at the time. This is in the 80s. And he used Freedom Hill as his example of just sheer power. Like he called it the Cabernet of Pinot because it was so tannic, so structured. Over the years, that's changed because it was destroyed. The vineyard was destroyed by phylloxera. And when Dan and Helen replanted, we went back in with a different trellis system. We helped them by buying vines and so forth, so we could manage the investment together to redo the vineyard, to get away from that old school Sealy-Winquist system to the vertical shoot position. Completely changed the wine. You know, now when we try this, now instead of having that crazy structure, now it's supple. You know, it's really super supple and texturally it's just so pleasant. It used to be mouth-ripping.
Like the Cabernet, like Pinot Noir.
It was painful. In the when it was young, it was painful.
It's not like that anymore.
No, it's not. It's actually gorgeous now. But but that's how important a trellis system can be. Just that one change.
And the
it changed everything. And the facing. Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Lots of detail. Great, and Freedom Hill's always had great color. I mean, even you're looking back to older vintages when you're opening older bottles, and you start to see the fading of that vibrant, primary color. Freedom Hill tends to hang on to that youthful color longer than it and Carter the most, I think, of all of our sets. Well, this is awesome. So cheers to you.
Cheers to
Thank you for helping me. Do you want to tell everybody about some of the special things we're doing?
Absolutely, yeah. So we are offering all club members 25% discount on any case purchases. So if you want to give us a call, we're happy to help you with that. If you are local to the area, we are offering free local deliveries in the Portland metro area.
Including moi?
Ken has been delivering.
Yes.
We get him out there. We work
That's
him.
right, that's right.
And, or if you want to come by to the tasting room, we're doing curbside pickup. We'll put it on the porch for you, and you can just come by and pick it up. Keep our social distancing. We're also doing virtual tastings. So if you just book online a virtual tasting, we can taste through some of our flight options for you.
I'm a little bit navigation challenged, but so if your delivery doesn't come exactly on time, but if I take my 13-year-old daughter Evie with me, everything happens perfectly. It's seamless. But yeah, we are of course responding to the COVID epidemic and wishing that we could be with you in person, and we will. Again, obviously, as we get through this as a country.
Hopefully soon.
And we will. Yeah. But thank you for helping me today.
And thank you for joining us.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers.